My stepfather and stepsisters went on a honeymoon, leaving me behind, so I made sure they wouldn't be coming back to my home. I'm 25 years old, and I legally own the house that has been in my family for decades. My mother left it to me after she passed away last year at 49 from a sudden aneurysm. It was a devastating shock, but I've since come to terms with her passing. My parents divorced when I was 9, and they shared custody of me, alternating weeks. Despite this, I was much closer to my mom. My dad, now 53, was always preoccupied with work and his social life, so I often felt like an afterthought. Still, as long as I had my mom, I didn't mind. At 20, while I was in college, my dad moved to New York for work, which meant I only saw him on rare occasions, usually during the holidays. 3 years ago, he brought his then fiancée, Laura, who was 40, to our Christmas gathering. Laura had 2 daughters, ages 15 and 17, from her previous marriage. She'd been divorced for about 6 years when she started dating my dad. It was surprising because he'd never introduced a partner to the family before. Despite the shock, I welcomed Laura and her daughters warmly, and the evening went smoothly. Laura was charming and polite, and although her daughters were quiet, I thought they were nice enough. After my mom passed, I discovered that she had left me the house in her will. She had made those arrangements just after I turned 21, as she was always meticulous about planning, even for unpleasant situations like this. After graduation, I decided to move back home, finding solace in the familiar surroundings. My dad, however, wasn't thrilled when he learned the house was now mine. He tried to hide it, but his disappointment was evident. This house was where my parents started their lives together before their marriage ended. During the divorce, my mom kept the house, while my dad avoided paying alimony. It was a fair deal, as my mom had given up her career to raise me while my dad pursued his ambitions. She worked hard to rebuild her life after the divorce, ensuring I never felt neglected. When my dad found out I owned the house, he started dropping hints about how it should have stayed in the family. I ignored his comments, focusing on grieving my mother and building my life. He went back to New York with Laura shortly after the funeral. But 6 months ago, he called to share that he and Laura had gotten married. He asked if they could stay at my house during the weeks leading up to their honeymoon. I reluctantly agreed, not wanting to seem heartless. But as soon as they arrived, tensions flared. Laura began treating the house as if it were hers, rearranging furniture and bringing in her own decor without asking. Her daughters acted entitled, commandeering the guest rooms and complaining about the Wi-Fi speed. My dad, as usual, was oblivious to the tension, busy planning their grand honeymoon in Europe. Things escalated when Laura asked me to move into a smaller bedroom so her daughters could have more space. When I refused, she snapped, accusing me of being selfish. My dad sided with her, saying I needed to adjust because we were family now. The final straw came when they left for their honeymoon without even telling me, assuming I'd stay home and look after things. That's when I decided enough was enough. I changed the locks, packed up the few belongings they'd left, and informed them via text that they were no longer welcome. I know my dad is furious, but I'm done being a pushover. This house is my sanctuary, and I won't let anyone treat me like a guest in my own home. Her daughters were attending private school nearby, so relocating wouldn't disrupt their education. At first, I agreed to let them move into my house and stay before the wedding. My dad convinced me it was temporary, and Laura promised they'd share expenses, which sounded fair enough. I had been living alone since my mom passed away, and having them around made the house feel less empty. About a month ago, they moved in. At first, things seemed fine. Laura was polite, and her daughters were quiet, though a bit entitled. They took over the guest rooms without asking, and one even complained about the Wi-Fi being too slow. Still, I thought I could adapt to the new arrangement. 2 weeks before the wedding, my dad sat me down. He asked if I'd consider letting them all live here permanently after the wedding. He claimed it would help me adjust to being part of their family and not living alone. His reasoning caught me off guard, especially since it felt like he'd been testing the waters all along. I hesitated. The house meant a lot to me. It was my mom's gift and sanctuary, and his suggestion felt invasive. While I appreciated not being alone, I couldn't ignore how he'd acted bitterly after learning he didn't inherit the house. I wanted to say yes, but my instincts told me to wait. I told him I'd decide after the wedding. He seemed disappointed but didn't press me further. The wedding was lovely, and afterward, they planned to stay a few extra days before heading back to Houston. I figured I'd tell them my decision before they left. But 2 days after the wedding, I woke up to an empty house. No one told me they were leaving. Their belongings were still there, so I was confused. Hours passed without a word until Laura finally answered my calls. Casually, she mentioned they'd gone on their honeymoon and would be back in a week. I was stunned they hadn't even informed me. When I asked why, she gave a flimsy excuse, saying they forgot. She brushed off my concerns, telling me not to overreact. I tried to stay calm and asked to speak with my dad. That's when her tone shifted. She snapped, saying he was too busy to deal with me and that I needed to stop acting like a spoiled child. Then, she had the audacity to remind me that this wasn't my house alone anymore. She told me to clean up before they returned, as if I was their maid. That was the last straw. Furious, I realized how naive I'd been to think this could work. I decided not to call my dad again. I was grateful I hadn't agreed to let them stay permanently. There was no way I was going to let them stay. I packed up their belongings hastily, stuffing everything into a few old suitcases and leaving them in the garage. I didn't care what happened to their things. They didn't belong here any more than they did. This house was my mom's, and it wasn't going to be overtaken by people who didn't respect me or her memory. Yesterday, they came back from their honeymoon. Luckily, I wasn't home. I'd already changed the locks, so when they found their stuff waiting for them, they couldn't get inside. My dad called me furious. He said I was acting childish and overreacting, insisting they hadn't done anything wrong by leaving without notice. I told him to take his things and leave. If I found them on my property again, I'd call the police. He yelled at me before hanging up, but I didn't care. I was done being treated like an afterthought. When I got home that evening, I saw they'd taken their stuff and left. I thought that was the end of it. But around midnight, my dad called again. This time, he said Laura wanted to talk to me. She started apologizing, claiming she didn't mean what she'd said and wanted to make amends. I wasn't buying it. If she truly regretted her behavior, she wouldn't have waited until now to apologize. It was obvious she only wanted to smooth things over because I wasn't letting them move back in. I told her to save her fake apologies. I wasn't going to fall for it. After that, my dad took the phone and tried to guilt-trip me. He said I was selfish for not letting them stay, that the house reminded him of my mom, and that I was being cruel for kicking them out. He even said my mom would be ashamed of me. That hit a nerve, but I stood my ground. I told him they weren't welcome back. His behavior when he found out I inherited the house should have been enough of a warning, and their actions since moving in only confirmed it. I always wanted a family, people who'd support me after losing my mom. For a moment, I thought my dad's new family could fill that void, but they've shown me exactly who they are, and I'm relieved I realized it before things got worse. It's been a few days since they left, but my dad has been calling and texting nonstop. I haven't answered. He thinks I should give them another chance to fix things, but they've wasted every opportunity so far. Why risk giving them more power to hurt me? I feel bad about the situation, especially since he's my dad, but actions have consequences. He never made much effort with me, so he has no right to demand sacrifices now. Update 2. Turns out my dad's persistence wasn't just about wanting to move back in. It was desperation. He finally admitted the truth. He wasn't taking a break from work. He was fired months before the wedding. He'd been burning through his savings, which were considerable, but they're nearly gone after the extravagant wedding and honeymoon. To make things worse, Laura quit her job when she married him, deciding to be a housewife. Now they have no income and no way to pay rent in Houston. That's why he assumed I'd let them move in. Laura had no idea about the money problems until recently, which explains why she never apologized. She didn't think she needed to. Her behavior was as fake as ever, but honestly, it suits my dad. Today, he begged me to let them stay just for a few days until he finds a decent job, but I refused. I reminded him that their behavior had been awful, and that I didn't need negativity in my life. He's an adult. If he didn't have stable income, he shouldn't have planned such an expensive wedding or honeymoon. I texted him a polite but firm message, explaining my stance. Of course, he took it as mockery. He said I'd regret treating him this way and would suffer for my decision. I didn't reply. What's the point? No matter what I say, he'll twist it to make me the villain. Update 3. Today, my dad decided to leave the city, but not without making a dramatic exit. I hadn't spoken to him in weeks, but he and Laura both texted me to proudly announce that Laura's ex-boyfriend had offered to sponsor their return home. Apparently, he's letting them stay with him and reconnect with her daughters. Her ex, who had been paying child support but staying distant, stepped up when he realized they couldn't handle things on their own. Good for the daughters, I suppose. At least one parent is trying. My dad didn't explain all this outright, but it was clear from their social media posts. They shared a picture of Laura's daughters with clover stickers and captions about new beginnings. I pieced the rest together. Honestly, I don't feel much. My dad's too concerned about his reputation to retaliate or cause trouble for me, and I've learned enough self-defense to feel secure if he tries. Now that they're leaving, I don't even need to think about them. It's lonely sometimes, but I'm better off focusing on the people who truly care about me. Update 4. Today, I got a call from my dad. Not unexpected, he's been trying to reach me through every channel possible. I finally answered out of curiosity. He sounded genuinely remorseful and asked for a chance to rebuild our relationship. But after everything I've been through, I felt indifferent. I've endured too much stress and pain because of him and Laura. I told him I was sorry, but my decision was final. I didn't want to reopen old wounds. Even though I could hear the disappointment in his voice, I knew this was the best choice for my own peace.